Hi, and welcome. You're listening to the X22 Report. My name is Dave, and this is episode 602, and today's date is February 26, 2015, and the title of this episode is US Government Central Bankers One Step Closer to Closing Down the Internet. Let's get right into the economic collapse news. Now, out in Greece, we understand the newly elected government folded. They gave in to the demands of the Eurogroup. And we've been saying that the people elected this government for a specific reason. To fold, to support the people, to support no austerity, to support no more debt, to support we need to get out of this situation to create jobs, to spur economic growth. And it seems like the government has done everything the complete opposite way of what the people wanted. Now, I'm hoping they're taking their time out, these 4 months, to try to make deals with Russia or China, and as it's getting closer to the deadline of the 4 months, they say, hey, look, we're going with a different country. We decided that the Eurozone is not for us, and we are not going with this. We're writing off the debt, and that is that. And we see the people in Greece, they're looking at the situation, and they're saying, you know what? This is not working for us, and we're starting to see one of the first anti-government protests in Greece with this new government. Now, there were no police. They didn't bring out the riot police to squash them. They let the people do what they want. They threw bottles. They broke windows. They were holding up banners, against austerity. And they were completely against everything that the government is doing. The reform list, the austerity measures, and they're letting the government know that, hey, we're upset here. We're sick and tired of every single government that we elect into power betraying the people. And we see this happening in many different countries, not just Greece. We see anti-austerity protests occurring in the UK, in France, in Spain, in Italy, and it is spreading because the governments are in so much debt that they can't function anymore. It cannot be sustained. Here in the United States, it's the same thing's happening. The government is in so much debt, it can't function anymore. It just continually has to borrow. It has to create new laws to try to bring in more revenue. We see the Greek people getting very nervous, and they're starting to withdraw their money from the banks. I mean, the latest January deposit data shows that the people there withdrew about 12.2 billion euros. The total amount of Greek corporate and household deposits has now tumbled to just 148 billion euros, down 7.7% from the month before and down 10% since November. And they're going to continually pull their money out. They will not stop because they don't know what this government's going to do, and they don't want their money stuck in the bank, because you know what happens, especially with the private Western central bankers. They will impose bail-ins in the bank. They will implement capital controls. And the people know this. They saw what happened in Cyprus. This is not coming out of nowhere, and we know the governments around the world, throughout Europe, United States, Canada, New Zealand, Australia, Switzerland, they all created bail-in documents because they know eventually they're going to have to pull them out and use them. They know eventually they're going to have to go inside the banks to get that money because there's no other place to get it. And they're going to have to shut everything down. You will not be able to access your money. And we knew this was coming for a long time since we've been reporting on it. We knew we were headed down this path because what other reason is there to create a bail-in document unless you're going to use it? It makes no sense if you're not going to use it sooner or later, and they're waiting for the right time to use it. And this will occur most likely after the event where they can blame it on another country or group because they're building up the propaganda to show that, yes, it was Russia, it was North Korea, it was China. They destroyed our economy. Now we have to lock down the banks. We have to implement capital controls. And we will have to take your money. It's the only way we can do this. And like I've been saying time and time again, only keep as much as you need to pay bills. This is what I personally do. This is my opinion. Otherwise, invest in gold and silver, keep cash on hand. Don't tell anyone where you're putting it, of course. But you want to protect yourself. What do you think the people in Greece are doing right now? They're protecting themselves because they know eventually this might happen. Here in the United States, we see the economy is continually falling apart, even though the government is trying to convince us that everything is fine. We see initial jobless claims jumped 31,000 to 313,000. This is the biggest percentage rise since December. The trend has changed. The trend now is moving up. We hit the bottom around September of 2014 or so, and now the trend is moving up for initial jobless claims. But what we see happen each time is the government comes in and they manipulate the numbers, they remove certain people, and then the claims drop down once again. The same thing happens with unemployment because these are the numbers they can control. These are the numbers they can manipulate. Statistics. Anyone knows you can manipulate statistics, and this is what they do. They manipulate GDP, they manipulate inflation, they manipulate unemployment, and they're continually doing this with every single statistical number that they can control. Everything else is out of their hands with what's really going on in the economy, where people aren't making money, where people have part-time jobs, where people can't pay for Obamacare because it's too expensive, where people don't want Obamacare because it's too expensive, where the housing industry is not moving in the direction they want because the people are completely tapped out and they only have a certain resources to buy the homes. And we can see that it's starting to fall apart. I mean, the consumer comfort level has plunged most in 10 months. Bloomberg's Consumer Comfort Index has been declining. People don't feel comfortable about what's going on here. And I know we talk about real estate quite a bit, but this is a good place to look to see what is going on here. Because when people have money, when people have secured jobs, when people feel like, yes, I will be in this job for a long period of time, we can make that investment into a home. I have good credit, great credit. It is time to go ahead and purchase. And they go ahead and they go purchase a home, but we're not seeing that. What we're seeing is free money from the Fed being filtered into hedge funds and investment companies, and they're purchasing the homes in cash. This is why we see mortgage applications declining every single week, continually falling. They fall, they're pumped up a little bit, then they fall once again. And this is because the people have no money. But what's very interesting, and I mentioned this before, but we're starting to see a trend that the lumber prices and the lumber sales, they are falling, they're tumbling. But they're out there telling us that new home sales have ticked up and lumber prices and lumber sales are continually falling. Does that make sense? Because you need the lumber to build the homes. I mean, it makes no sense. And when I'm looking at this, we see that lumber prices are tumbling, breaking to 8-month lows today. And we've seen this picture before, and it didn't end well. This was tracked prior to the 2008 housing crash. Before that, when the traffic just dried up, nobody was going to the homes. Nobody was going to the new construction. People couldn't sell their homes. More and more houses came onto the market. The housing prices dropped. We're seeing the same thing occur today. There's no difference, really. Except this time it's going to be worse, because you have to remember, last time, prior to 2008, people had good paying jobs. People were able to purchase their homes. Today, most of the people in 2008 lost their homes. The Fed had to pick up all the toxic real estate. They have between $3 and $6 trillion on their books right now. Probably a lot more, but this is what they're reporting. They bought the toxic real estate up from the banks. The banks received that money, and they were instructed to pump up the stock market. Don't loan that money out, put it back into the market. And this is what they did. So today, what we have on the market are short sales, foreclosures, empty homes, and the people have bad credit, lost their jobs, working at lower paid jobs, part-time jobs, or don't have jobs at all. And this is why we're not seeing this huge uptick of home purchases. This is why we see lumber sales, lumber prices declining, when they continually tell us that new home sales are increasing. It doesn't make sense. Something's off here, and we know it's off. It's the manipulated purchasing of homes. The manipulation where they tell the banks, listen, I know these 20 people foreclosed. Don't put them out as foreclosed. Let them live in it. We don't want this on the market, because if we put more and more of these homes on the market, the prices decline, and we want to keep them off the market so the prices go back up. And this is the game they've been playing. Now, we understand Russia, Brazil, India, China, South Africa, and other countries are members of the BRIC system. And it looks like they're going to be creating a parliamentary assembly of the BRICS countries to talk about different issues, to discuss what's going on and which country should get money, which country shouldn't. And we can see they are pushing their agenda. They're creating the next wave of basically the central banking system, because the private Western central banking system is dead. And the United States government, central bankers, they understand this. Now, will the Russian, China, BRIC system work in everyone's favor? No, eventually what happens, these central banks, they do the same thing over and over and over. And eventually, it will not be good for the entire world. And this is why we need to get rid of the central banking system. This is why the government needs to back their currency with some form of gold or something else to keep tabs on what they're spending. The money shouldn't be loaned out at interest, because there's no reason to do this. I mean, before the central banking system, we really didn't have these type of problems. And think about this. Here in the United States, the Fed creates money, gives it to the government, and the government prints up treasury bonds. Well, instead of doing all of this, why don't they just create the money? If they can create treasury bonds, they can create money. And they can loan it without interest. And if they back it by something, it gives checks and balances to the government officials, where they can't run the debt up to 18 trillion, which is on the books that they want everyone to believe, or the hidden debt, which is around 200 trillion. And again, when we look at the situation, it always comes back to the central banking system. This is why the dollar is continually losing value. This is why they had to back the dollar up with oil. And now that's falling apart. It's a Ponzi scheme. That's all it is. Now, Obama was out there, and he was talking on a TV interview about the illegal immigrants and how the officers need to follow his instructions. President Obama used a TV interview to describe law enforcement officials as soldiers under his direct command, and he threatened to punish law enforcement officials who tried to ignore his November policy barring the enforcement of immigration law against millions of illegals. In the U.S. military, when you get an order, you're expected to follow it, said Obama, who is legally the commander-in-chief of the U.S. military. It doesn't mean that everybody follows the order. If they don't, they've got a problem, and that problem is with him. The bottom line is that if somebody is working for the U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, and there is a policy that they don't follow, and they don't follow it, there are going to be consequences, and this is coming from Obama. And you have to remember, he created this with a memorandum, and a court in Texas said this is completely unconstitutional. And we have other court systems looking at it, saying, yeah, it is unconstitutional. So basically, he's giving instructions to the law enforcement to allow illegals to come over illegally, which is breaking the law, and he wants the law enforcement to break the law to give them amnesty. So, what are we really looking at here? They keep telling us America is run by the rule of law until they want to break it. Just like Obamacare, when he decides, I'm not going to wait for Congress, I'm just going to write a different law. Nobody fights him on it, and then it becomes law. I mean, does that make any sense? Sounds like a dictatorship to me. Now, today, the FCC approves net neutrality, and it seemed to pass in a 3-2 vote. Now, of course, they're using net neutrality, and everyone's like, yes, we want a free internet. This is great. This is exactly what we want. Well, no. Basically, this is the cover-up of what they're really doing. This is the illusion that they're putting out there to make everyone believe that this is what they want. Think about it. Let's go back in time. The Patriot Act. It's supposed to be for the patriots. Basically, what it turns out to be, they're allowed to spy on every single American. Let's see, the Affordable Care Act. Is it affordable? Absolutely not. Actually, Congress couldn't even read it until they passed it. You know that's bad. The Ukrainian Freedom Act, which gives them aid and lethal weapons. Doesn't sound like freedom to me. They always put titles on things to confuse everyone, to make everyone believe that this is what it is, because no one ever really reads what it's all about. And this net neutrality, they use this to cover up what they're really doing. And what they're really doing, they're trying to take control of the flow of information. I mean, what's in the new internet regulations? Well, nobody knows. The FCC is refusing to release the 332 pages of the internet regulation plan to the public. Well, right there you know they are hiding something. The Obama administration is refusing to tell the public why they were so instrumental in crafting these new regulations. Based on statements, the FCC commissioner member, these new regulations have been heavily influenced by the Obama administration, and they will regulate internet service providers as public utilities. Once that happens, the FCC has the power to regulate everything on the internet. See where they're going with this? The White House is selling these regulations as net neutrality, in an attempt to make the American public believe they are somehow saving the internet. But let me remind you, the internet does not need saving. Why do you need 332 pages of regulation for an open and free internet that we have right today? What really needs to be changed? What needs to be regulated? Think about that. So what's in the 332 pages? These regulations are an attempt to control the internet. It's about controlling the internet and free speech. Because these new regulations will place the internet under the same Title II regulations which require broadcast television and radio stations to be licensed by the FCC. Anyone who owns or operates a website could be required to get a license to operate that website. And again, the government would have to approve this. So they can say, okay, you want a license, it's going to be $8,000. You fill out all the paperwork, just like if you're trying to purchase a weapon. It goes into the government, they say rejected. Because we don't want this, and they'll give some type of reason, and they have the ability to do this. Remember, Obama, back in February of 2014, wanted to put government researchers to monitor media organizations. Remember Dianne Feinstein? She created a bill to designate who a real journalist is, and each person would have to get licensed. Well, what does this all fall under? Why are they doing this? And we talked about this quite a bit. It is the 10 steps to close down an open society. This is from Naomi Wolf. She went out, she did research, she found out, Yes, this is how they close down an open society. And we've been talking about this for quite a while. You can go back to my other reports and you can listen of how this is actually being closed down. This is step number 8. Step number 8 is control the press. All dictatorships and would-be dictators target newspapers and journalists. They threaten and harass them in more open societies that they are seeking to close. Over time, in closing societies, real news is supplanted by fake news, false documents, and propaganda. You don't have to have a shutdown of news in modern America. It is really not possible. But you can have propaganda pushed into all media outlets. So it confuses what is real news and what is propaganda news. And this is what's happening right now. The White House is directing a stream of false information that is so relentless that it is increasingly hard to sort out the truth from untruth. In a fascist system, it's not the lies that count, but the muddying. When citizens can't tell which is real or fake, this is when they give up their demands for accountability bit by bit. The only way to do this and to control the flow of information is to control the internet, is to regulate it. And guess what they're doing? They are doing this right now. We are so close until this entire society is closed down, where they have complete control and nobody will know what is really going on. You will lose all of your freedoms. This is what they are trying to do. They're trying to get rid of the people's rights. They don't want you to have rights. They want this to be a dictatorship. They want to give you propaganda. Basically, they see you as the sheep, their herd, where they can control you and tag you and move you into where they want you to go and what they want you to believe. That's what this is all about. Control. And eventually the people are going to be sick and tired of this, and they're going to say enough is enough. The same thing's happening in Greece. The same thing's starting to happen in all the countries, and eventually it will spread to the United States because people will eventually realize what is going on. Most of the time it's when it's at its end game and people start pushing, they start talking about it, they start feeling like something's wrong, and this talk eventually leads into removing the government. Now, of course, we want to do this peacefully. We want to give them the chance to step down, but governments don't like to do this very often. But you do it peacefully with millions and millions of people calling on the government to step down. Everyone. And we need to go back in there and set up some rules of the government and who they can take money from. If they introduce war talk, they are the first ones on the front lines with their families. They can't take donations from businesses or any other entities to push a certain agenda. I mean, there are certain things we need to do to control what the government is. Now, again, our founding fathers thought they created a system where they're able to do this, but again, what happens is over time, they write laws, they bypass things, they say, yes, this is legal now, and the government gets out of control, and our founding fathers knew this. They knew eventually we would have to fight for our rights, our freedom, once again. Now, as we know, in Ukraine, their entire economic system is falling apart. Actually, they're in a depression. And no matter how many bailouts there are, it's not working whatsoever. I mean, the entire country is falling apart. And we can see right now that people are buying products, stocking up, because they realize the value of their currency is continually dropping. Pretty soon they're going to have to do what Weimar Germany, the people there did. They're going to have to come in with wheelbarrows of cash, and they won't even be able to buy anything. And this is hyperinflation. And the people out in Donetsk and Lugansk, they're going to introduce a multi-currency financial system using the dollar, euro, and yuan to protect themselves from this free-falling currency. And again, we have to remember that Ukraine is blocking, they have an economic block on the southeastern region right now, and they're saying the Ukrainian currency has depreciated to such an extent that large city stores are becoming sold out, and they decided to do this to protect the people's wealth and to protect themselves from what is coming. And I would do the same thing. I would even try to get gold and silver and have the cash on hand also, not in the Ukrainian currency. I would go to different currencies to definitely protect what is going on. And we can see a lot of people are actually doing this because it's getting harder to find products. It's getting harder to pay for them, and they're starting to ration. And this should be a lesson for people here in the United States and throughout Europe that, again, as the system breaks down, and it can happen at any time, it will happen in the same way. And people who aren't prepared, they're going to be very nervous, very upset, and this is when riots start. Now, we understand that the southeastern people have been pulling back their heavy military assets, and we see that Ukraine wasn't doing that. And what's funny is the EU, US, and Ukraine, the envoys in the OSCE, they tried to ignore what was going on, that they were pulling back their heavy artillery. And eventually what happens is, as the southeastern people continually push back, and pull back, I should say, their heavy artillery, Kiev can't make the case of keeping their heavy artillery in place because it kind of looks bad. Why are they keeping their artillery in place if they're moving it back? So we see Ukraine right now, Kiev, has started to pull back and withdraw some of their heavy weapons. They had no choice to do this. And they are doing this because it really looks bad. But don't worry. They are planning for a major offensive, and they will not stop, because Poroshenko said that, he had no choice but to pull back his heavy weapons. But don't worry, if the southeastern people decide to attack, he will be ready, and these heavy weapons will be pushed right up to the front lines once again. So they're not pulling back because this is what they wanted to do. It's because of how the world is looking at the situation. And you have to remember, in this country, under Poroshenko, there are paid mercenaries that are taking orders from the US government central bankers to keep the war going. So we have two things going here. We have Poroshenko with his armed forces, and then we have the paid mercenaries that really don't take orders from Poroshenko, and these are the people that are continually firing. These are the people that are continually pushing the war and setting up false flags, which they're most likely going to set up to blame this on the southeastern people and Russia. And we can see that this will happen most likely very, very soon, most likely moving into the springtime. And we see more and more countries are bringing in advisors, medics, and we see the United States has done this, we see the UK has done this, and now Poland is saying that they intend to send military instructors to train Ukrainian soldiers. And what's very interesting about this is that we've seen videos of a US person there, a British person in there. The southeastern people said they've been hearing all different type of languages, Polish and other languages inside of Ukraine, and I'm wondering if they're sending these small amounts of advisors or medics in there to say, yes, we know they're in there, they're just medics, they're just advisors, and this is why you're catching them on tape. Because it seems like they're just sending a few, like a dozen, 10 here, so if any of these things come out once again, they can just write it off and say, oh yes, we know about that. But before, as we know, these people were not in there. And we know a lot of them are paid mercenaries, and we know they are doing most of the fighting. Now, Russia and Cyprus, they have signed an agreement, and Cyprus is going to allow Russian warships to call at the ports of Cyprus with humanitarian aims. And they're going to be able to dock their ships right in Cyprus. And of course, they're doing this on purpose because they need to position their ships in different areas because they realize the central bankers, they're pushing and provoking war. And Putin knows that this is not going to stop. He sees the writing on the wall. So does China. And we see that they will not stop until they get a war started. I mean, right now, the United States is worried that the propaganda out there is leading towards Russia, where they have the ability to counter everything the United States says in their propaganda. And the alternative media and the new media show proof of what they're saying. So John Kerry was out there, and he is concerned the U.S. is falling behind when it comes to putting out information. What he's really trying to say, he's concerned that they're putting out propaganda, and the alternative media, new media, the Russian media is always countering it and showing a different viewpoint with proof. And it's really messing them up right now. He stressed that RT's influence is growing worldwide and the U.S. doesn't have an equivalent that can be heard in Russia. Well, yeah, they set up a propaganda news outlet in there. It's called Voice of America, and it's been broadcasting since 1947 inside of Russia. So what they're really trying to say is they're losing the war on propaganda. And they need to shut this down. They need to take control of what is going on. And this is why there is a huge, huge push to control the internet. I mean, think about it. RT would have to get a certain license, and they can censor them right on the internet. So all news media sites from all different countries, except those that are approved, will be allowed to be viewed by people. The alternative media, the new media, the same thing goes. So most likely, in the end, everyone will be getting their news from the corporate media. This is exactly what they're looking to do. Now, it seems that the Chinese Navy now has more diesel and nuclear attack submarines than America does. This is coming from a U.S. Navy admiral. Some of them are fairly amazing, and Beijing is exploring new ways of projecting its power on the seas. They may not be the same quality, but their submarine forces are growing at a tremendous rate. And like I said, these countries, China, North Korea, Russia, Iran, Syria, and others, they know what is coming. They've been building up their armed forces because they realize that, eventually these central bankers are going to push war. This is why there's the pivot to Asia. This is why there's 60% of the U.S. fleet is out in the Pacific. This is why there are bases encircling China, because they know eventually they're going to need to contain it. Even Obama says, yes, we are containing China. And the question is why? Why are we containing them? Because they know once they provoke a war, they have everything in place. This is why military assets have been being moved into Eastern Europe, into the Middle East, and into Africa. They are getting prepared for what is coming. Now, out in the Middle East, we understand the countries, it's all falling apart. The governments are falling. The puppet regimes that the United States put into place, they're completely losing control of these countries. And one of them is Libya. As we know, it's Yemen, Iraq, Lebanon. And we see that they want to get back into these countries, especially Libya right now. They have no control over it. NATO's chief said Thursday the alliance was ready to advise Libya's government on defense and security issues, saying the deteriorating situation in the country is posing new security threats for Europe. And this is what they're using right now. And Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg told the news conference in Rome that the alliance plans to bolster its surveillance of the region by using drones. Now, this is what the United States / NATO does before they make an offensive inside the country. They did this with Syria and Iraq. Remember, they launched the drones first. They flew them around. They gathered intel to spec out the whole entire area, and then they made their offensive into Iraq and into Syria, where they started bombing. The same thing now is going to happen in Libya. They're flying drones all over Libya right now, collecting the intel for the major offensive that is coming. And we can see this is building up, and it's building up very, very quickly. Now, in my past reports, we talked about how a cyber attack is going to bring down the financial system, shut down power, and wreak havoc on the United States. Now, all this is going to be a false flag event. This will be done from the inside to be blamed on another country. And they've been building up with their propaganda for quite a while because they want to make sure that it's on record, that they've been inspecting this. North Korea's been hacking into the United States. Sony. Russia has malware all over the financial system. China has cyber espionage. They've been cyber attacking. They've been hitting the power grid, speccing it out. And we can see right now that they're continuing with this story, and it's accelerating as time goes on, and they're continually bringing in more and more information to let everyone know that, yes, this is going to happen. And we have to remember Janet Napolitano, she told us it's not if, but when a cyber attack occurs, because they already know that this is going to happen, because, again, it's going to be an inside job. The U.S. has elevated its appraisal of the cyber threat from Russia. This is coming from the U.S. intelligence chief. The Russian cyber threat is more severe than we had previously assessed. This is coming from James Clapper, the Director of National Intelligence, and he was talking to the Senate Armed Service Committee. Saboteurs, spies, and thieves are expanding their computer attacks against a vulnerable American internet infrastructure, chipping away at U.S. wealth and security over time. Rather than a cyber Armageddon scenario, what's going to happen is they're going to chip away at low-level type of attacks, cyber attacks, against different resources inside the United States, which will break down economic, power, water, and it will not happen all at the same time. Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea, all the players, of course, are the top nation-state cyber threats. China had been probing the U.S. electrical grid in an effort to lay the groundwork for an attack. And Russia has been planting malware into the financial systems that could bring down the entire banking system and destroy the economy. We can see right now this is the propaganda they're pushing out there. They need everyone to believe that it is from these nations that this is going to happen. This is the big false flag. This is the big one. Because they understand the entire system is falling apart and collapsing. And they've been building on this story for quite a while. So there's going to be physical attacks from either the Islamic State, Al-Qaeda. There's going to be cyber attacks from Russia, China, North Korea, Iran, Syria. And they're going to push it all together and create the story of why we need to go to war. We see that Israel is continually pushing their agenda to get into Iran. I mean, we find out that the CIA planted evidence to show Iran that they were building a nuclear weapon, which is completely false. It was a false flag. We understand Israel and the United States planted Stuxnet into a nuclear reactor and destroyed it. It came out that Netanyahu has been lying about nuclear weapons inside of Iran. And then all of a sudden, because all this information came out, forget everything you heard. New evidence just came out that, and this is coming from the National Council of Resistance of Iran, or MEC, they reported that they found an underground, top secret site where Iran is creating nuclear weapons. And I wouldn't be surprised if they start showing us pictures like they did with Osama bin Laden, who was living in the caves of Afghanistan. They showed us everything. His TV, his couch, his refrigerator, what he had in his refrigerator. They just couldn't find him. Again, propaganda, and it's amazing how this came out at the same time that Netanyahu was called out about the entire nuclear lie, and how the CIA planted fake evidence to show that Iran was building nuclear weapons. All of this is propaganda. Now, it seems they named Jihadi John. He's a British man, if you didn't know. And his name is Mohammed Emwazi. And of course, they already knew who he was. All these people are paid mercenaries to do a job. They know each and every one of them. They know who they are. But they held back on telling everyone who it was. And now they're releasing it and letting everyone know, yes, it was a British man. He went there back. He went to Syria back in 2012. And we see, yes, see, people are going there. No, these are all paid mercenaries. This was all created to convince you that we have a terrorist problem. There are warnings all over the world about more threats. And they're continually scaring everyone. DHS is out there saying, yes, the threats are ongoing because their budget is in jeopardy. If they don't get approved, we might have some type of false flag, maybe a mini one, to prove that, yes, their intelligence did pan out. And this is why we need the budget. If their budget does pass, it'll just disappear. But we see the FBI is out there once again arresting terrorists. Of course, as we know, the FBI has done this time and time again. They captured 3 men who were charged with conspiracy to provide material support for terrorism. FBI informants convinced 3 people to tell them they'd really like to join ISIS, then booking flights for them to Turkey, then arresting them. The goal appeared to be to get them to say the least plausible things possible. I mean, they were out there, and of course you can convince any of these people to say anything you want. A lot of times these people are loners. A lot of these people have mental problems. And they convince people, they pay them money. They'll actually pick up a weapon for them or pick up plane tickets. And these are all patsies to make everyone believe that there's terrorists out there. But the question is, why does the FBI have to manufacture its own plots if terrorism and the Islamic State are such a grave threat? Well, it's because they're not. It's because it's all made up, and they need to have the FBI continually arrest people to convince you that we have a problem. I mean, look in the last couple of days. We see the propaganda continuing. It's actually getting worse. They're saying, the Islamic State is destroying all Christian items. They're destroying books. They're destroying relics. I mean, they're just out there continually pushing the propaganda as hard as they want. It seems like they're trying to set up type of a race war between Muslims, religion wars between Muslims and Christians. They're doing everything. If one thing doesn't work, they switch to another thing. The beheadings didn't work. Nobody really cared. They all thought it was fake. A lot of them were. And they said, wait a minute. We know the Islamic State. They're paid by CIA, Mossad, MI5. We know this is all fake. We know you're controlling them. You're dropping weapons to them. You're telling them when you're going to bomb. It's all fake. It's like the propaganda with the right-wing extremists, where the government's trying to convince us that everyone who's against the government is a right-wing extremist, domestic terrorist. And you have to be careful because it's on the rise. Because in the last 5 years, there's been 24 situations of the sovereign citizen. And I mentioned one of those crimes before, which didn't sound like it was a sovereign citizen or anything else except a regular everyday crime. But we have more of them. And this is what they're trying to use to convince someone. September 2010, Victor Dwayne White of West Odessa, Texas, shoots and wounds 2 sheriff's deputies and a utility worker who came onto his property to access an oil well. It was a 22-hour standoff. A domestic disturbance call brings police to the home of William Faust in Page, Arizona. Faust shot and killed the ensuing altercation. July 2011, James Tessie of Texas fires on police after an attempted traffic stop. November 2011, a property dispute brings the authorities to Rodney Brossard's home in South Dakota. He threatens to shoot the officer, and a standoff follows. July 2013, Eric Stanberry pulls a gun on a security guard outside a Nashville strip club. He went out and said he's a sovereign peace officer, and the police tased him. July 2013, David John McCormick refuses to let the Coast Guard board his boat. After lunging at one of the crew, he is arrested. 2014, when deputies try to serve an eviction notice on Earl Carson, he threatens them with a rifle and is killed I mean, this is just everyday crime. There's nothing special about this. If there was truly a problem with domestic terrorism, we would see mass groups out there parading, pushing their agenda. And I'm not talking about the agent provocateurs and the government doing it. I'm talking about real groups out there doing this. But we don't see any of this. I mean, yesterday we talked about, or 2 days ago, about how the government buildings are being suspected of being their next target, and they have no evidence of this whatsoever. This is all made up to convince you that yes, there are people out there. The Islamic State is a real terrorist organization. Domestic terrorism is on the rise. Why are they doing this? Because they understand that when this thing completely falls apart and the collapse comes, and the people are angry, pissed off, and they want this government out there, they have to say, yes, these are the domestic terrorists. These are the people that we're going to be going after. They trick you in the Middle East. They say, yes, we're fighting the Islamic State. No, they're not. They're fighting the people of these countries who want their country back. The same thing is going to happen here. Remember, when the US government has control of the government, everyone is a terrorist. When they don't have control of a government and they want control of a government, the people have freedom, democracy, the right to overthrow that government. What do we have here in the US right now? The United States government central bankers control the government, so everyone else is going to be a terrorist who oppose them. Even though we have the right to do it, we are still going to be called terrorists. Just like if the founding fathers were here today, they would be called terrorists. Listen, everyone, thanks a lot for listening. Be well, be safe, and especially be prepared. Thanks a lot.